Growing up in post-USSR was difficult. I think that its systems and effects really didn't go away when it broke apart in 1991. I was 3 years of age, but its influence lingered for many, many more years. I think it was a very hopeless environment. I remember when I was around like 5 or 6 years old, I was walking with my mother, and I asked her, and I clearly remember, I said, "Mom, do you believe in God?" And she said, "Some days I do and some days I don't." And I thought that was very interesting because the message that I've been getting growing up was there is no God. There is only what the state can do for you or something that you can do for yourself. When the USSR fell apart, I remember it hit us really bad financially and economically, and that was the time when my dad kind of entered my life as well. He was very abusive to my mother and I, emotionally and physically. I grew up in a very tiny, studio apartment, and I remember the only place of escape was the bathroom. So I would go and lock the bathroom door and pray to God, whom I'd never heard about in this environment. My parents never told me about Jesus or God, but I just felt like there was someone out there, and I just had this sense from a very, very young age that there was a Savior out there for me. I didn't really have a family that I belonged to. I was placed in the Dance and Music Academy, which kind of became my home. My dancing career was actually going really strong, and I was invited to go on a television show in Moscow. And I remember getting a phone call. My father has been in the States for a year working on a nuclear power project for the government, and they said that I had to leave my competition and come to the United States, which meant absolutely nothing. It meant world shattering for me because I had this one thing, dance, that became my family. And I remember leaving and coming to the United States to be with the abuser that I've known from a very young age. But I also came not realizing that I would find my true father, my true Savior. I was invited to go to a camp with the church, First Presbyterian Church in Columbia, South Carolina. And in the mountains of Kentucky, I became a Christian. I finally heard the gospel, and I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior. The voice that I heard growing up that I wasn't really sure about became a reality for me when I was 13 years of age, when God revealed himself in a magnificent way to me, and I understood what the gospel is. I understood who God is. That internal voice became a reality in my life, and I accepted Jesus, my Lord and Savior.
So we are walking through the Sermon on the Mount. This is our second week in this series. The Sermon on the Mount is the most famous sermon ever preached. The Sermon on the Mount is the most kind of complete set of Jesus teaching that we have. So it comprises all of Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. And what we're going to find out as we start going like week by week, if you keep coming, the Sermon on the Mount a lot of times kind of like a gut punch. And it's going to reveal, it's going to challenge, it's going to push, and it's going to really reveal whether we are simply Jesus fans or whether we're Jesus followers. Are we just Jesus fans or are we Jesus followers? And Sermon on the Mount is going to show that. And this is kind of how he does this. Let me kind of set the context for the whole picture of the Sermon on the Mount as Jesus begins to give it. Because if you are one of the disciples, so imagine you're one of Jesus' disciples and he's giving you this sermon, here's what he's doing. He's calling you up out of the crowds and he's basically saying, look, I'm going to give you my kingdom vision. In other words, the kingdom's here. Why? Because the king is here. I'm gonna give you my kingdom vision, what the world would look like if I'm in charge, what the world will look like when I am the king, when I'm running and ruling over things. This is what it's gonna look like. We kind of know this, right? Politicians kind of give us this. They're like kingdom speech, their vision speech of when my administration's in control of the country, this is what it looks like. That never happens, never comes to fruition, right? But this is Jesus, and he's saying, this is my kingdom vision. Imagine you're one of the disciples, and you've been called out up on this mountain to hear this sermon, this kingdom vision from Jesus. Like, you're looking at Jesus, like you've hitched your wagon to this man, like this is the Messiah. The Messiah, this is the man that Israel, the people have been waiting for, hoping for, longing for, praying for, singing about for hundreds of years and even thousands of years. And now he's here in your lifetime. And not only that, he's called you to be one of his disciples, not just a fan, but a follower, to come up on the mountain and hear this kingdom vision. And so you're imagining, if you're one of the disciples, you're imagining right at that moment, man, what's it going to be like when he's king? What's it going to be like when he's in charge? When you start thinking about his enthronement, he's going to come and he is going to roll on these cats. He's going to destroy Rome. I'm imagining like him putting his foot on the neck of the Roman emperor, the Caesar, armies at his disposal, people bowing down before him. And where will you be? I'm one of his disciples. I'm one of the few, right? I'm one of the few that were chosen. I'll be at his right hand. I'll be at the place of glory and honor and prestige and status. And so then Jesus starts this sermon, right? In verse 3, remember the first word? Blessed. Blessed. And that word blessed means blessed. It means happy. It means to be favored by God. He's saying, yes, Lord, yeah, I want to hear more. Blessed. How are you going to show me favor? How are you going to make me happy? What are you going to do for me, God? And then he says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn, the meek, those who hunger and thirst. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those who are persecuted. And if you're one of the disciples right now, you're going, wait, what? What are you talking about, Jesus? Like, this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't the deal. But here's what Jesus is doing. He's saying, I have an upside down kingdom. I have a kingdom completely different from your vision. He has to come in and destroy and shatter their vision of the kingdom in order to bring his own, which is infinitely better. And he has to come to us and shatter sometimes our vision of who God is and what he's going to do and how he's going to act and all the things he's going to do. He has to come and shatter our vision of the kingdom in order to bring his own vision. And you see the question that raises, right? But Jesus, if we are persecuted and I mean, we're supposed to dominate these cats, not get persecuted by them. We're supposed to dominate them, not make peace with them. Like, what's going on? And you can understand the difference. Is like, well, the question is, well, how are we going to change the world? How are we going to influence the culture? How are we going to leave a legacy? How are we going to transform the world? Like, that's part of our mission statement at the journey, right? We want to love God, connect people, and transform the world. How can you do that if you don't have power? You're just being persecuted and having to be merciful, make peace, and all this kind of stuff. Answer, our text today, verses 13 and 14. You're the salt of the earth. You're the light of the world. You're going to be light and salt. This is what I'm going to give you to, Jesus is saying. See, what are you given to? I was in a meeting just a couple weeks ago, and it was a great meeting, some great people, and the guy sitting to my left is a guy I've known for years. I respect him tremendously, and he began to talk and kind of try to rally us, right? And he was like, listen, guys, I have given my life for the last 40 years to this thing. And it's a very good, godly, noble thing. But it just struck me, and I began to think, if God were to give me another 10, 20, 30, 40 years, what do I want to look at my grandkids? What do I want to look at my congregation and say, I gave my life, my one only precious life to this? Something small or something grand? Something temporal or something eternal? That's what Jesus is saying. I want you to give your life to being the salt of the earth, the light of the world. Why? Verse 16, so people might see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. So Jesus says you're the salt of the earth. You're the light of the world. The first thing you got to know about this passage, if we're going to really examine it and look at it, he says you are the salt. You are the light. Well, who is the you? Who's the you he's talking about? It doesn't mean everybody in the world. Like, it's not just like every person's salt and light, right? Because then we wouldn't need salt and light. So who is the you he's talking about? Well, verse 1 kind of makes it clear, right? Because it's not the crowds, it's the disciples. It's not just the fans, it's the followers that he is talking to. Who is the you? How do I know if I'm not just a fan, but I'm a follower? How do I know if I'm really a Christian? How do I know, what does it really mean? What does it really look like to be a Christian? And Jesus says, look, if you're a Christian, every Christian has three new things about them. They got a new relationship, they have a new motive, and they have a new identity. They have a new relationship, a new motive, and a new identity. And you say, where do you see that? Well, you got a new relationship. Look at verse 16. In verse 16, Jesus says, let your light shine before others so they may see your good works and give glory to who? Your Father. Christianity brought this radically new concept of God into the world that said, it's not just that, yes, any person, right? You don't have to be a Christian. You can know God as like a proposition. You can believe in him. You can know him as a creator. If somebody had to make all this stuff, like he might be in your mind like a fussy old boss or the big rule maker in the sky or the big guy in the sky or whatever. Like, you don't have to be a Christian to know that. But every Christian has a new, radically new relationship with God. And Jesus taught us to pray, our Father. He says, your Father. See, we have lots and lots of kids in our church, and I love every kid in our church. But there are only 3 children in our church that can look at me and say, he is my Father. It's in the same way, like God loves every person, loves the whole world, but only people who have come to him by faith in his Son, Jesus, who put their faith in Jesus, can look at God and say, he is my Father. I know him that way. I know him intimately. I don't just believe in him, I know him. And the Bible says that if he is your Father, he looks at you. And you heard even Katerina say this in the video. She said, I went to be with my abusive father, but there I met my true heavenly Father. And the Bible says, if he's your Father, he looks at you just as he looks at his own Son, Jesus. That means the same amount of love, the same degree of love, the same level of joy and delight. He looks at Jesus, he looks at you. A Christian is transferred from being an orphan to a daughter, a slave to a son. You have a new relationship with God. Do you know God like that? Do you just believe in God, or do you really know him? You say, my Father. So you have this new relationship, but you also have a new motive. See, what he also said in verse 16 is that people will see your good works and what? Praise you for them, right? No, they'll see your good works and give glory to your Father. Every Christian has a new motivation in life that says, I had a kingdom vision for my life, and it wasn't very big. It was all about me. It was all about, the American dream or whatever it is. But Jesus is saying, I've got a much bigger, much broader, much more beautiful vision for what the kingdom is going to be like. And if you follow me, if you're not just a fan but a follower, you have this motivation of glory. At the center of your heart is giving glory and honor and praise to God. I love the Old Testament word for glory, the Hebrew word that means, glory means weight. It means heavy. In other words, you give God weight. You give him ultimate weight, ultimate authority, ultimate honor in your life. We say we're going to weigh our decisions, right? We're going to weigh what decision we're going to make. And what do you give the most weight to? And he said, you got to make these decisions, right? You got to decide where are you going to live? What are you going to do? Who are you going to marry? What things are you going to pursue? How are you going to spend your time? How are you going to spend your money and your talent and all that? Is the thing that is driving that, what would give the most honor and glory to God? Or what would help me the most? See, Jesus is radically reorienting their vision of the kingdom. The disciples, they would come to Jesus and say things like Mark 10 and Matthew 20, when you come to your kingdom, Jesus, let me sit at your right hand. And he said, you don't even know what you're asking for. You can't even drink the cup I'm going to drink, the cup of suffering and persecution and wrath and propitiation. So he says, he has to come and destroy our vision of the kingdom in order to bring his own, which is infinitely better. So you have this new relationship and this new motive that is for the glory of God. And then you have a new identity. You notice what he says in verse 13 and verse 14, right? He says, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. He doesn't say you might be. He doesn't say you could be. He doesn't say imagine if you were. He doesn't say go be salt and light. What does he say? You are the salt. You are the light. In other words, he's saying it's not first what you do, it is who you are and then what you do. It's a great example of this in the movie Blood Diamond. I don't know if you've seen this, older now, 8 or 10 years old. Great movie, wouldn't recommend it for everybody, but really great movie. It's about the diamond trade in Africa and how much violence and harmful effects it has on kids. And so, but it starts out in this little village in Sierra Leone, and Solomon, a father, and his little boy, Dia. And there they are playing, having a good time, but this warlord comes into the village, and they start stealing the children. They steal little Dia away from his dad. And they take him off to their camp, and they begin to do violent things to him, and they begin to teach him to do violent things, all for the sake of these diamonds and to trade them on the black market. Of course, Solomon, the father, he's not going to give up, right? That's his boy. So the whole movie is he's tracking down, he's searching for, he's looking for his boy. And then the climactic scene in the movie at the very end, he finally finds him, and there's his son with a machine gun, 10 years old, machine gun trained on his friend, Solomon's friend. And then what happens is, and spoiler alert, right? But this movie's 10 years old, so if you haven't seen it, that's, sorry, your fault. But the very end of the movie, like he comes up and there's his son, this boy he's known, and he's just not his boy, but he's this ragged clothing and, ready to shoot. And Solomon runs up to his son. And he doesn't say, listen to me, put that gun down, listen to what I'm telling you, don't do that. He doesn't tell him what to do, he tells him who he is. He says, Dia, look at me, Dia. You're Dia Vendée. You're Dia Vendée, part of the proud Mende tribe. You're Dia Vendée, son of your mother who's waiting for you, brother of your sister Nyanda who is home playing, wondering when you will come, owner of the wild dog Babu who only obeys you. Dia, look at me. I know they made you do bad things, but you are not a bad boy. You're my son, and I'm your father, and you're going to come home and live with me again. And immediately he drops the gun, and he embraces his father. Once he was reminded of who he was, he didn't need to be told, he knew what to do. So you need to be reminded who you are more than you simply need to be told what to do. You need to be reminded who you are. You're a son, you're a daughter, more than you need to be told what to do. I know a lot of you're Christians, and maybe you're doing some crazy things, you're running off and all these kinds of things, but a Christian is a person who, like Dia and Solomon, whose father has seen them do crazy, wicked, rebellious things, but the father tracks them down. The hound of heaven comes after you and has rescued you and saved you by his son Jesus and said, now you're going to be my daughter, you're going to be my son, you're going to come and live with me. That's who a Christian is. And he says, you need to be reminded who you are more than you need to be told what to do. That's the you. And he says, you are the salt, you are the light. It's not just the fans of Jesus, the followers. It's the ones who really know him, the ones who are devoted, the ones who have been made his children. Is that you? Do you have that intimacy? Do you know God that way? That's what Jesus is encouraging us to on the Sermon on the Mount. Believe in him, put your faith in him. So then he goes on with these analogies, right? You're the salt of the earth, you're the light of the world. What does that mean? These are very deep, rich, practical, and biblical imagery. So when Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth, what does that mean? Well, it means a number of different things. I'm going to give you just 4 quick ones. So what does salt do? What is salt about? Why this imagery of salt? And the first thing is salt encourages. You're like, well, I've never really met any encouraging salt. I don't know how that really works, but just track with me for a second. Jesus is using an analogy of something like salt, which is what? It's minor, it's small, it's insignificant, and it's cheap. You can buy a lot of salt for just a little bit of money. And I know some of you are saying, well, how can I transform the world? How can I change the world? Like, I'm a nobody. I'm like on the outs. I'm not like cool or hip. I'm not president of the country. I'm not even president of my own household. Like, I don't have money. I'm on the outs. But Jesus is saying, look, it doesn't matter how ostracized you feel, how minor you feel, how small you feel, how insignificant you feel, because Jesus says, just like, right, a little bit of salt just transforms a meal. It just brings the life out of a meal. He's saying, I can use you, whoever you are, no matter what you've done, no matter how outside you feel, I can use you in my kingdom to transform the world. Why? Because I'm the king. And I can do whatever I please. He can use anyone. So salt is encouraging. But the main thing Jesus, I think, is thinking of here is that salt is a preservative. Salt preserves. If you know, ancient world, right? Like we all grew up in this century, in this Western world, where you have refrigerators, and you have some meat or whatever, you put it in the refrigerator or the freezer, and that would keep it. But in that day, they didn't have it. So the way you kept meat was that you poured salt on it, and you rubbed salt into the meat, and the salt would preserve the meat. It would keep it from spoiling. It would keep it from decaying. It would keep it from going bad. And Jesus is saying that's what a Christian does in the world. That's what a Christian does with people. So if you're the salt of the earth, when you're around, conversations don't decay. Conversations don't go bad. They don't degrade into demeaning women. They don't degrade into making fun of minorities. They don't degrade into gossip and slander because their salt is there. When you're around, the way you treat people the way people are treated doesn't go downhill. It doesn't decay and spoil. People are treated with dignity and honor. Why? Because the implacable preservative of salt is there. That's the kind of influence we are to have in whatever circles that you run in. But often Christians, we're not very good at that. You know what we are good at oftentimes? Complaining. We're good at kind of pointing out what's going bad. We're pointing out what is decaying. And we look around and go, well, that's bad. That person's wrong. Like, that's a whole mess over there. I don't know what they're doing with that, right? But you see what Jesus is saying? Like, imagine right now if I were to come out with like a big, nice, raw, juicy steak, and I just like laid it over here on this stool, and it sat there, and then I just leave it there all week. And we come back next week, and I still got this steak laying here. What's it going to be like? It's going to be nasty. It's going to be like flies and maggots and spoiled and rotten. And then what if I just looked, we were all here again. I just looked at this steak and was like, this is a worthless piece of meat. Can you believe how terrible and cruddy this piece of steak is? You'd be like, you're an idiot. Like, you should have preserved it, right? You should have refrigerated. You should have done something about it. In the same way, to complain about all the bad people and the bad places and the bad things going on the earth without actually doing something about it is to fail to be salt. See, the question is not primarily what's wrong with the world. The question is, where is the church in the world being salt and being light? See, several weeks ago, I heard an interview on the radio, and I heard this guy talking, and it was just a couple of days after the Michael Brown tragedy in Ferguson. And if you remember that night, they burned the Quick Trip down. And this guy being interviewed was a business leader, not in Ferguson, but somewhere else in St. Louis. And he was saying, you know what? If I was a business leader there in that community, you know what I would do? If I owned that Quick Trip, I would cash that insurance check, get my check, and I would bust out of there. And I would be gone. I would show those people, you can't treat business like this. I'm not going to serve you anymore. If we're honest, what he says makes complete logical sense. Based on all the values the world teaches us, that would be the right, smart thing to do. But I doubt if it is the gospel thing to do. Why? Because salt goes to the places that are hurting, the places that need it, the places that are broken. Salt gets in there. See, by contrast, I started to think about a member of our church and something that he did. And he was a guy who started a small business years ago with his friend, and the business began to grow a little bit and do pretty well. Nothing like, no like global corporation, multi-million-dollar, but just, small business doing fine. And he partnered up with his friend, and they started to go like, hey, God's given us this. Like, we got this new motive for God's glory, not our glory. So what should we do with this? How should we use it? And then they began to get involved in Mission St. Louis in the job leadership training program, and they began to mentor some of these young men, most of them coming out of drug, alcohol abuse in prison. And then they began to hire these men, and they began to train these men, and they began to promote these men in their business. And then they began to disciple these men and point them to Jesus. And then some of these men, verse 16, saw their good works and began to give glory to their Father in heaven. All because they said, how can we use this small thing that God has given us? How can we be salt and get into the hard places, the hard people, and really do that? That's what salt does. It preserves. It goes after that. So it encourages, it preserves it. But salt's rubbed. It's like salt rubs in, right? Like salt in a wound, right? But I grew up I've told you before, I grew up in South Carolina, like kind of rural Podunk, South Carolina, and we just got, running water here a few years ago there, but it's okay because, we used to have a saying when I was growing up in South Carolina, because, you're always comparing, and South Carolina's a pretty backward place, but we had a saying, and it was, thank God for Mississippi, right? Because there's just somewhere a little more backwards than you, right? Sorry to all the Mississippi people. I'm sure you had a saying about Arkansas. I'll probably have to send some emails after this. So I grew up in South Carolina. My grandfather taught me how to do this salt preservative thing. I don't know if you've ever killed your own meat and had to do it, but he showed me you don't just sprinkle a little salt on it. We had this big side of pork or whatever, and he's pouring salt all over it, and you got to just rub it and massage it and lift it up and get it into the hard creases and the places, and you got to do it salt gets rubbed in. That's what Jesus is saying about being salt of the earth. In other words, what places are broken? What places are desperate? What places are you being rubbed into? What people's lives that are hurting are you being rubbed into? You have to get in there, you have to get dirty, you have to get messy. See, there are some places that you just called to go. There are some people whose hands you were meant to hold. There are some people whose tears you were meant to have cried on your shoulder. Some bedsides that you were meant to kneel beside. Some marginalized people that you were meant to befriend. What places, what people are you being rubbed next to so that you bring the light and the transformation of the gospel? And so salt's rubbed in, and then mainly the way we know salt is what? Seasoning, right? So salt seasons. That's what Jesus says at the end of verse 13. He says, if salt has lost its taste, how can it be restored, right? It's a seasoning. You put it on bland food, it becomes good food. You put it on bland chips, it becomes, nice chips. And what he's saying is that, look, salt brings zest. It transforms a meal. Christians, we don't have to bring a pall of depression everywhere we go. We don't have to yell at people from street corners. Right now, kind of the impression is hey, party's over, the Christians are here. That's kind of the view that we have, but that's not how Jesus was, right? Think about Jesus in John chapter 2. He goes to a party, a wedding party, and the party is dying. And he makes 150 gallons of the best wine ever, and they have a festival. They have a party, and it goes wildly successful. That is what Jesus says. He brings the party. Where are you bringing things to life? Are you bringing zest and life to people's lives and to the world? So that's what it is to be salt. And then verse 14, he says, you are the light of the world. A city set up on a hill cannot be hidden. You're the light of the world. And you kind of know this, right? Even if you're in a really dark room, just a sliver of light brings hope, makes all the difference, right? If I could choose one superpower, I think I would choose eradicating fear of the dark in children, specifically my own. Because if you've ever done this, it's you got to have this door cracked, that light on, this night light over here, the hall light semi on with the door here. It's a whole matrix of things you got to go through just to get a little, sleep in the house. And so Jesus recognizes in me hey, there's something about darkness that we just fear and that is difficult. But he says, here's what light does. Light goes into darkness and it exposes it. Light exposes darkness, right? And you know that darkness is not a thing. Darkness is not an entity. It has no properties. Darkness is only the absence of light. Darkness is the absence of light. Darkness is just there's no light here, so it's dark. So light and darkness aren't opposite yin and yang. Light's not the opposite. It's the destroyer of darkness. It comes in and destroys darkness. Now, where does darkness prevail? Where there's no light. Where does darkness prevail in your heart? When I say darkness, I mean sin, brokenness, greed, lust, pride. It prevails where there's no light, where you refuse to let the light of the gospel come in, where you refuse to let community and people ask you hard questions and come in. And where does the darkness prevail? In society, in culture, in our city, where we refuse to be the light and go in. We refuse to shine. We refuse to call out injustice where it exists. So are you letting the light into the dark places of your heart? Are you being the light against injustice and things like that in our neighborhoods and cities and wherever you work and live? Because the light You're supposed to go in and expose darkness. That's why Jesus says, therefore, let it shine. Let your light shine. And then light brings truth. If you look through, light has all this rich imagery. You look in the Old Testament, 200 times the word light is used almost, and it has multiple meanings, but one of them is truth, right? When the light comes on, you can see, you know what the truth is, you know what to do. And so what Jesus is saying here is when you're the light of the world, you tell the truth. You have personal transparency, personal authenticity for people, meaning you tell them who it is you serve, who it is that your Father, what it is you live for, His glory. What your identity is. I'm a daughter, I'm a son. Like why you make these decisions that you make. Like you tell people the truth. It's just being personally authentic about those things. He said, well, I don't know if I really want to do that because, isn't that kind of offensive to kind of try to convert people and then tell them that you kind of understand, they don't. Like, isn't that offensive in our culture? Listen, Jesus says they might see your good works and glorify your Father. But isn't it offensive? Do you know the world is trying to convert you? I mean, they're trying to convert us, right? Like, hey, watch this, look at this. Like, think about the world the way we think about the world. Think about God the way we think about God. Think about money and sex and power the way we think about those things. They're trying to convert you. And Jesus is saying, no, you're the light of the world. You're the salt of the earth. Tell the truth. And Jesus shows how illogical this is in verse 15. Look at verse 15. He says, people don't light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. See, just like they didn't have refrigeration, they didn't have electricity, right? Like Jesus' day, you didn't go and flip a light on, and it was a nice, easy way to do that. Like, light was expensive. To have light in your home at night, that was an expensive thing because you had to go and buy oil to put in the lamp to do that. And Jesus was saying, how ridiculous would it be if you spent your last few precious dollars to buy this oil to get in this lamp, and you lit the lamp, and you're burning the oil, and you just put a basket over it? That makes no sense. That'd be ridiculous. He says, in the same way, how ridiculous is it that we, who have the light of the world purchased at the expense of Jesus Himself on the cross, would hide that from our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, our families? He's saying that would be utterly ridiculous, utterly illogical, because light brings the truth. We exist as one author, Dick Keyes, he calls us chameleon Christianity. Chameleon Christianity. As you can see here, like this little guy, you can kind of see him, but he's like all blended in, right? He just turns the color and blends in exactly to his surroundings. As we say, like most Christians, they're not salt in the earth, they're not really light in the world, they just kind of blend in. Chameleons are cowardly, so they just want to look like everything else. And he's saying, are you living a chameleon Christianity where you're just like blending into no, salt and light are distinct things, they come in. But so many times we're living chameleon Christianity because we're afraid. And there was a great quote from a student in a New York Times article a few years ago, and this is a student who's in college and he's an atheist, and he said this. He said, I cannot consider any Christian a good moral person unless she is trying to convert me. Why? Because either she doesn't believe what she says or she doesn't care about me. A more humorous example, the show Seinfeld. I know it's a little dated. Some of you weren't even around for that, but one of my favorite shows of all time is a great episode where Elaine finds out her boyfriend, David Puddy, is a Christian. David hasn't told her. She just finds out through various deals. And so she goes to him because she's like disturbed by this. And she goes, David, I'm going to hell. The worst place in the world with the caves and the ragged clothing and all the heat. What do you think about that, David? And Puddy says, gonna be rough. Then she follows up again and she says, you should be trying to save me. I am not going to hell, but if you think I'm going to hell, you should care that I'm going to hell. Elaine says basically the same logic that Jesus is saying. Like, you're the light of the world. People are in darkness. They need light. And so if you're part of the you who are the salt, who are the light, do you have any non-Christian friends? Who are you praying for? Who are you showing mercy to? Who are you showing hospitality to? You see what it says, verse 16, it says, they will see your good works. Not just what your good words, but your good works. They will see them, and then they're going to ask. They're going to recognize something. What do people see when they look at you? Do they come to you and say, I notice that you don't really live for the same kind of value. You don't really live for these things that we're living for. I notice that even during like really hard, crazy times, like you still have a measure of peace about you. Like, what is this thing? And you can tell them. You can tell the truth. You can be authentic about that. That's why Jesus says in verse 16, see what he says? Let your light shine so they see your good works and they give glory to your Father who is in heaven. So light brings that kind of truth. But then the last really image about light is really hope. It brings hope. You look through the Old Testament, whenever light dawns, it's just like bringing hope into the world. It's a great passage in Isaiah that prophesied Jesus, and it said, the people were walking in darkness, but they have seen a great light, the light of Christ. It brings hope. I don't know if you've ever been in like the middle of the woods on a really dark night, like no moon's out and you're by yourself, like it's really spooky. If you have a little bit of light show up, you got some hope. And that's what he's saying. It's like, look, we live in a world where people are looking for hope, but they're not finding it, they're not getting it. Well, I want to give you one answer about why like we live in there's so many people desperate for hope, because this is the answers that our secular world tend to be giving. And this is from a scientist named Stephen Jay Gould. Great name, great John Houseman name, but not a great answer he gives. He says, why are we here? Like, what is our hope? What's our existence for? This is his answer. We're here because one odd group of fishes had a peculiar fin anatomy that could transform into legs for terrestrial creatures. We're here because the earth never froze entirely during an ice age. We're here because a small, tenuous species arising in Africa 250,000 years ago has managed so far to survive by hook and crook. We might yearn for a higher answer, but none exists. Hopeless. If that is true, we're all wasting our time this morning. If that is true, there is no hope for your life because there's no reason to exist. He says, but he almost betrays himself. Do you see what he says? We might yearn. Every person, I don't know one person, Christian or non-Christian, belief or not belief, whatever, I don't know one person that doesn't say, man, there's got to be something. Like, I just have this sense inside of me, there's more to life than what. He says we might yearn for one, but then he says, none exists. He's trying to squash the hope. But Jesus is saying, you are the light of the world. You bring hope. You have a message of hope to bring to the world. And here's Jesus on this sermon telling a few Palestinian peasants, you're the salt of the whole earth. You're the light of the whole world. It's a ridiculous claim unless Jesus himself is the light of the world, which he said in John 9, I am the light of the world, and I shine in the darkness. See, he was the salt of the earth. But what happened to him? He was trampled under the feet of men. He was the light of the world, but what happened? They snuffed him out. But he rose again the third day, and when we have faith in him, he says, you have a new identity. You are now salt. You are now salt. You are now light. You're like the moon on the sun, like the moon's reflecting the greater glory, the greater light of the sun, and that's who you and I are called to be. You say, well, I don't know if I can do that because, man, you're calling me to like do this and bless the world. I don't have all those resources. I can't do that. Listen, God is not calling you to be awesome. God doesn't call you to be awesome. He doesn't need you to be awesome because he's awesome. He doesn't need us to be awesome. He needs us to experience his love and therefore be loving. Experience his grace and therefore be gracious. He needs you to experience his faithfulness and therefore be faithful. He's the one that makes us the salt of the earth and the light of the world, and by his grace, he does that. So if you're going to do that, if you're going to be salt and light, let me ask you a couple questions just to reflect on. If you can be salt of the earth and light of the world, a couple questions. If I'm going to do that, what idol do I need to let go of? What idol do I need to let go of? What person, what people, what places do I need to be praying for, pouring out my heart in prayer? What risk do I need to take? What things do I need to sacrifice because I have a greater motive for the glory of God than I do for the glory of me? See, what do you want to look back on? And if God gives you 10, 20, 30, 40 years and say, man, I gave my life to something trivial, small, superficial, or something grand and eternal, to being the salt of the earth, the light of the world, so that people would see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. And what if it was not just that a few of us were salt and light? What if we were a church that was salt and light? See, Jesus, when he says you're the salt, you're the light, he doesn't mean you individually. It's plural. He says y'all are the salt. Y'all are the light. What if our church was? What if our church was a gospel movement? What if we had many churches in our city that were a gospel movement of salt and light? See, by his grace, that's what he is making us. That's what he's calling us to be. He has named it. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Let your light shine before men so they might see your Father in heaven and give glory. As we close, I want us to see a video of transformation of a young man's life that was done because Mission St. Louis had the vision to be salt and light in our community. And this is the story of how that transformed Dorian.
The late 70s, early 80s, my mom brought crack cocaine to St. Louis. My brothers had Macintosh computers. My brothers went to school in limos. She had Ferraris. My dad was one of her workers. So she's like the queen, you should say. So everywhere I looked around, it was somebody selling drugs. It wasn't never no regular doctor or lawyer to look up to. I did what I saw, you know what I'm saying? I became a drug dealer myself by the time the age of 15. But I'm not paying attention. I got little nephews and little nieces, they looking at me. So now I'm the role model that I wasn't never trying to be. I became, my own success, if you could say what you want to say, but I thought it was, you know what I'm saying, till God showed me like, that ain't really what success is, you know what I'm saying? Success is what I give you down here in St. Louis with a little drug charge. I got caught up. I'm 28 years old, almost 30 years old. I was in jail for 195 days, man. First time I ever did a bid. First time I ever got locked up for anything. First time I've been away from my family, And my daughter was on the way, so the feeling of knowing that I'm a father, you know what I'm saying? That like, okay, I made some mistakes with my nephews, them showing them the streets. But I got an opportunity this time to plant a good seed. All I want to do is come home to my daughter, see her born, cut the umbilical cord, and just hold her. That's all I wanted. But it was looking like I wasn't gonna make it in time. But God was on my side like he always is. And I made home in time, a week before she was born. So what type of faith is that? When I get out of jail, I was looking for something that was positive, and Mission St. Louis was right there. It picked me right up on my feet, put me where I need to be to take care of my family. And I've been successful ever since. I had to work hard, I had to dress well, because they ain't play that. They don't play in Mission. You gotta dress for success. You gotta do your homework. They give you homework every day. You gotta study. They help us get an interview, show us how to approach your interview, how to approach it. When you get that confidence in you that you can do an interview or talk to your bosses and have that confidence and that leg up on them, you feel like you can go anywhere and get a job. And it's been great. I can't complain. My daughter, she ain't got to worry about me coming home at night. I beat her every night. So proud of that. Got benefits, 401k, medical, dental, eye. I love Mission St. Louis. I do anything for them. Anything they need me to do, I do it for them. Anybody that have gave to Mission St. Louis or thinking about giving Mission St. Louis, even the thought, I thank you for that. Because for y'all saved my life. Y'all saved my family's life. So now we broke the family, quote unquote, tree. Now we doing positive things because of you giving. And all I want to do is thank you for everybody else that can't speak. If you ever need me for anything, I'm there. Thanks again, and I love y'all. That's all I got to say.